Jake Carter stood at the stove, stirring beans in an old frying pan. He was wearing a stupid apron with ducks on it, an anniversary gift from Lindsay. Outside the window, the suburbs of Chicago were dark. The wind howled like a hungry dog. Buddy, their shaggy mongrel, dozed by the radiator, his ears moving. The clock was ticking 1942. Lindsay was late. Again. He remembered how it all began. 10 years ago, she burst into his studio, long-legged, raven-haired, and wearing high heels that clicked on the concrete. Her Ford had stalled, and she stood with her arms crossed, watching him rummage around under the hood. "You are my savior," she said then, and he smiled, wiping off the oil with a rag. A month later, they were drinking beer in a bar. A year later, they were kissing while shouting "bitter" at the wedding. Lindsay was hot as pepper, but warm as a summer evening. She called him her lighthouse, and he believed that they were a team. He fixed cars, she built a career in marketing, and their small house, with its shabby sofa, seemed like a fortress. Now this fortress was cracking. The door slammed, Buddy jumped up and wagged his tail. Lindsay walked in, beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and a coat wet from the rain. The phone in her hand immediately disappeared into her pocket like evidence. Jake smiled, but she didn't even look. "The beans are ready," he said, putting the plates on the table. "Where were you?" "At work," she snapped. Her voice was like a knife-cold, sharp alien. She threw her coat onto a chair, and Jake caught the scent not of her sweet jasmine perfume, but of a strong cologne, masculine, expensive. His heart began to pound, but he pushed the thought away. "Not now." "I could call," he said quietly, looking at her empty plate. "I was waiting." She snorted, crossing her arms. "And you could not hang around the house like a chained dog. How long can you tinker with this junk in your garage?" Jake squeezed the spoon. The workshop was his life, the roar of engines, the smell of gasoline, the joy of customers when their old cars roared again. In the early years, Lindsay was proud of it. "My husband is a magician with keys," she boasted to her friends. Now her eyes screamed something else. "It's not trash," he managed. "That's what kept us going." "Us?" She stepped closer, and anger flashed in her gaze. "Do you think I'm happy with you? In this barn? With your smelly hands and constant whining?" He looked at her, and his throat tightened. Once upon a time, she kissed these hands, laughed at the oil stains, called him her hero. They dreamed of children, of a trip to the ocean, and made plans in the backyard while drinking lemonade. Now her lips curled like a stranger's. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You loved me. Did you love it?" She laughed, short and sharp. "You were a weakling from the start, Jake. But I just needed a reliable start. And now, you know what? I'm leaving. I have another one. A real man, not like you are a wimp who is worthless even in bed." The words hit my chest like a hammer. Buddy whined, ears flattened. Jake wanted to shout, ask who, but his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. She grabbed her coat, glanced at their wedding photo above the fireplace, him in a wrinkled suit, she with flowers, both happy, and grinned as if it were a joke. "Wait for the divorce papers," she said, already at the door. "Goodbye, Jake." The door slammed and the house froze. The silence fell like wet snow, heavy and cold. Jake looked at the beans cooling in the pan and at Lindsay's empty plate. There was a crack across his face in the mirror above the sink. He couldn't remember when it had appeared there, but now it seemed like a symbol. Buddy nuzzled his knee, and Jake petted the dog without looking. Her voice was spinning in my head. A real man. How could he miss all the red flags and not see her betrayal, probably because he loved? Jake sat at the kitchen table, clutching a mug that said, "Best Husband." The whiskey flowed down my throat like liquid fire, but the pain did not go away. Buddy whined at his feet, poking his wet nose into his knee, as if trying to pull him out of this black hole. Outside the window, the wind howled, throwing rain on the glass, and each blow sounded like a mockery. "You are alone, Jake. Alone." Lindsay had left less than an hour ago, and the house already seemed alien empty, like an old garage where no one starts the engine. He took another sip, and their wedding flashed before his eyes. Summer, A stuffy room in a suburban club, cheap flowers on the tables. Lindsay is in a white dress, simple, but such that all the men in the audience craned their necks. She laughed as she danced with him to some stupid pop hit, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. "You are my lighthouse, Jake," she whispered in his ear, and he believed. Then he was everything to her, a car mechanic with golden hands, a guy who could fix anything, even her broken heart after a quarrel with her mother. They made plans, a house, children, a dog. Buddy arrived a year later, a bow-legged puppy that Lindsay called our first baby. Somewhere it got lost. Jake slammed his mug on the table, whiskey splashing onto his fingers. "A real man," she said. These words burned worse than alcohol. He remembered how she began to move away 6 months ago, maybe more. The phone is always in his hands, short, "I'm at work," the smell of cologne that he has never worn. He asked once, after she returned at midnight, "Are you with someone?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't make this up, Jake. I'm just tired." And he believed. Because I wanted to believe. Because he loved her, the Lindsay who kissed him after his shift, laughed at his jokes, and warmed his hands in the winter. Now this love lay in the dust like a broken engine. He stood up and staggered. The whiskey hit his head. The bottle was half empty, and he poured more without looking. "Rag," she said. "Zero in bed." This was not just a betrayal, it was a low blow, right to who he thought he was. He remembered their first night in this house, the old mattress, the creaking floor, her laugh when he dropped the pillow. Then she whispered, "You are the best, Jake." And now zero. Who was she with? With what real man? He clenched his fists, but his fingers trembled. Buddy barked, short and sharp, looking into the empty corner of the kitchen. Jake turned around, but there was nothing there, only the shadow of the lamp swaying on the wall. He sat back down and ran his hand over his face. There was a noise in my head from the whiskey, from the pain, from her words. And then he remembered Edna. Grandmother was as harsh as the winter frost. The whole family was afraid of her gaze, sharp as a knife. But she was softer towards Jake. "You're clean, boy," she said as he sat on her porch, munching on her hard cookies. And also, repay the debt to those who were betrayed. She repeated this when her father got drunk and yelled at her mother when the neighbor stole their lawnmower. Then it sounded like an old woman saying. Now these words surfaced like bubbles in a swamp. "Repay the debt to those who betrayed," he muttered out loud, his voice hoarse with whiskey. Buddy whined, looking at the same corner. Jake squinted. The shadow on the wall moved, stretched out, and began to look like an old woman in a long dress. He blinked, and she was gone. "Damn," he breathed, but his heart was pounding. He stood up, staggering, and walked to the window. The rain beat on the glass, and something flashed in the reflection, not his face, but hers, Edna's, with those coal eyes. "Repay the debt," whispered the wind, or so it seemed to him. He turned away and collapsed into a chair. The whiskey in the mug trembled to the rhythm of his hands. "Lindsay betrayed me," he said out loud, as if testing the words. And suddenly they burst out on their own. "Repay the debt to those who betrayed." Louder, angrier. Buddy barked, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. The shadow in the corner thickened again, tall, thin, with the smell of earth and old wool. Jake froze, looking at her. It was Edna, or her ghost, or drunken delirium. She didn't move, but her voice broke through the noise in her head. "You know what to do, boy." And then darkness. He fell face down on the table. The mug toppled over, and the whiskey spilled onto the floor. Buddy howled, and the wind outside the window responded, as if agreeing. Jake quietly repeated, "Repay the debt to those who betrayed you." Lindsay stormed out of Jake's house, slamming the door so hard the windows shook. The rain beat on the asphalt, but she didn't notice she was driven by adrenaline, anger, and something else similar to freedom. She walked towards the car, clutching the phone, where a new call was already flashing. Trevor. Her real man. She grinned, remembering Jake's face, pale, confused, with those pitiful eyes full of pain. "Wag," she muttered as she got behind the wheel. He didn't even shout after her or try to stop her. Weakling. 20 minutes later, she was at Trevor's, a luxurious apartment in the center of Chicago. Glass walls, a leather sofa, the smell of money and expensive whiskey. He answered the door with his shirt unbuttoned and a smirk that always made her weak in the knees. Tall, fit, with a gold watch on his wrist, not like Jake with his smelly hands and cheap jeans. Trevor pulled her towards him, and she laughed, throwing her coat on the floor. "Well, how did it go?" he asked, pouring her wine. His voice was smooth as silk, with a hint of mockery. "I'm finally free," she answered, taking a sip. "Imagine him standing there with that stupid bean, like I'm coming back for dinner." She told him that he was a zero in life, in bed, everywhere. Let him eat his own trash and sleep with the dog. Trevor chuckled and ran his hand along her thigh. Poor Jake. And I thought he would at least hit me with his fist. He? Lindsay rolled her eyes. He didn't even make a peep. He just looked like a beaten dog. 10 years with this nonentity, and not once did I feel like a woman. And you. She pressed herself close to him, whispering, "You know what I want." They collapsed on the bed, and Lindsay gave in to the moment his hands, his scent, his strength. She laughed while he tore her clothes off, and there was something angry, triumphant in every sound she made. "Here you go, Jake," she thought, imagining his face. She remembered their first night, his clumsy caresses, the creaking of the mattress, his whisper, "I love you." Then she smiled. Now it seemed pathetic to her. Trevor was different, raw, confident, real. She screamed his name, and the thought flashed through her head. Let Jake choke on his whiskey. Then they lay there, sweaty and tired. Trevor fell asleep almost immediately, his arm resting heavily on her waist. Lindsay looked at the ceiling, listening to his breathing and the sound of rain outside the window. She felt like a winner. She had shed her old life like a snake's skin. "Goodbye, Jake. I get what I deserve," she muttered and closed her eyes. But when she woke up, a surprise awaited her. She was lying in her bedroom, their bedroom, with Jake. The same bed, the same smell of old wood, the same shabby chest of drawers in the corner. Lindsay sat up with a jerk, her heart pounding. "What the hell?" she exhaled. Trevor wasn't there. The window was closed, but the glass was shaking, as if someone was knocking from outside. She clearly remembered falling asleep in his apartment, not here. It was not a dream. Her skin still retained the warmth of his hands. She stood up, her bare feet touching the cold floor. Something was wrong in the room. The walls, painted a soft beige, were covered in cracks, thin as a spider's web, but deep, as if the house was being torn apart from the inside. She went to the mirror above the chest of drawers. Her reflection looked at her with empty eyes, black as holes. Lindsay backed away and tripped over the edge of the carpet. There was a ticket on the nightstand, old, faded, with a damp smell. Carmaville, one-way business class. It was written in crooked handwriting, and these words sent shivers down my spine. "What nonsense," she muttered, but her voice was trembling. She grabbed the ticket, and her fingers pricked as if from a static discharge. The walls began to tremble more violently, cracks began to spread as if they were alive. She rushed to the door, pulled the handle, and froze. There was no Chicago outside the door. A city stretched out before her, strange, alien, with streets paved with broken glass and old letters. Lindsay stepped forward, and the glass crunched under her feet. She bent down. On one of the pieces of paper was her handwriting. "Jake, I'll be late. Don't wait up." The letter she wrote a year ago, when she first lied to him about work. Next is another, "I love you," from their first years. She threw it away, but the wind picked up the paper and threw it in her face. The air was heavy, tainted with rot, but the scent of her perfume penetrated through it. Jasmine, the same one she wore for Jake. And the whisper quiet, omnipresent, "You betrayed, his bitch." It came from everywhere, from the streets, from the shadows, from the air. Lindsay spun around, her hair sticking to her face. She was in her sexy lingerie that she bought for Trevor, barefoot, and the cold of the glass cut her feet. But that was not the main thing. The main thing is that she didn't know where she was, and what was happening. Is this a joke? Nightmare? Alas, this was her new reality. "Who's there?" she shouted, but her voice was drowned in a whisper. A figure emerged from the fog, a thin woman in a torn coat, with a cigarette in her fingers. Her face was wrinkled, Her eyes were like coals, and her grin was crooked, like an old scar. "Welcome to Carmaville, baby," she said, blowing smoke. The voice cracked like an ungreased loop. "I'm Marge, your guide to this shit you chose." "Where am I?" Lindsay took a step back, but the glass bit into her heel and she winced. Where? Marge chuckled. "In a place where people like you end up. Your husband called out karma by muttering something drunk. And guess what? She's a bitch, she'll beat everyone. Even you, beauty." "Jake." Lindsay laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "This idiot can't do anything. He's a weakling, it's just a joke. Where's the camera? Where should I smile?" "You're wrong." Marge took a drag, smoke swirling in the air. He said the words, and Karma heard. "Now you are here, and your ticket is one way." Lindsay squeezed the paper in her hand, feeling it burn her skin. The whisper became louder. "You betrayed." She turned around behind her, stretched a street strewn with letters, and at the end loomed a shadow, tall and thin, with Jake's voice, "Lindsay." She blinked, and the shadow disappeared, but the fear remained. "What should I do?" she asked, looking at Marge. "Go," she answered, pointing her cigarette into the darkness, "and pray that karma is in a good mood. Although, judging by your dossier, the chances are slim." Lindsay stepped forward, and the glass under her feet cracked like bones. She didn't know where she was going, but she felt that this was just the beginning. Jake woke up with his face buried in the kitchen table. My head was humming like an old engine. My whiskey was a sticky stain. My mug with the inscription, "Best Husband," was lying on the floor. Buddy licked his hand, yelping softly, and Jake sat up, wincing in the light of the lamp. Outside the window, the wind howled, throwing rain against the glass, but inside it was quiet, too quiet. Lindsay left, leaving behind a void as cold as concrete in a workshop in winter. Her words, "rag," "zero," "real man," still rang in my ears, but now they didn't sting. They just were. He stood up, his legs trembling slightly from the whiskey. Buddy growled, looking at the bedroom door, and Jake frowned. "What is it, dog?" he asked hoarsely, stepping towards the door. He opened it and froze. There was a ticket on Lindsay's pillow. Old, wrinkled, with the smell of dampness and earth. "Controller," the crooked letters moved under his fingers when he took it in his hands. My heart beat once, twice, but there was no fear, only emptiness, like after a long shift, when I no longer have the strength. He clutched the ticket, and the world went up in flames. The kitchen curled up like burnt film. Buddy was gone, and Jake was somewhere else. Before him was a city strange, alien. The streets glistened with broken glass. The fog hung in the air, thick and cold, with a taste of rot. He stepped forward, and under his shoes it cracked an old letter, her handwriting. "Jake, I love you." He kicked it, watching as the wind carried the piece into the darkness. "Love," he snorted to himself. The word now sounded like a mockery. A whisper crept from the fog. "You betrayed. You betrayed." Jake squinted, looking for where he was coming from, but saw only shadows long, crooked, like the fingers of a dead man, and then hers. Lindsay stood in the distance, wearing a set of underwear he had never seen, barefoot, with a ticket in her hand. Her hair stuck to her face. She screamed something, but there was no sound. Jake looked at her, and nothing moved in his chest. No pain, no pity, just emptiness, cold and heavy, like a wrench in your hand. Someone touched him on the shoulder, cold, bony fingers. He turned around. The woman is thin, in a torn coat, with a cigarette in her mouth. Eyes like coals, a crooked grin like an old scar. "You're looking in the wrong place, boy," she said, blowing smoke. The voice cracked like an ungreased door. "I'm Marge. Welcome to Carmaville." "Where are we? Is this a dream?" Jake asked, not taking his eyes off Lindsay. She rushed about in the fog like a hunted animal. "The place where bills are paid," Marge replied, jabbing a cigarette in her direction. "You summoned karma by muttering the old woman's words. Now you are a spectator of her fall. Watch and don't interfere." "Spectator," Jake repeated. The voice was as smooth as asphalt. He remembered her grin as she left, the smell of cologne, her laughing at him with someone else. "I didn't want this," the thought flashed, but immediately faded away. Maybe he did. Maybe that was right. I wanted to. I didn't want to. Karma doesn't care. Marge chuckled. You said it, and she came. She is there. You are here. Just watch. Jake stared at Lindsay. She screamed, waved her arms, and fear flashed in her eyes, wild, unusual. Once upon a time, he would have rushed to her, to Lindsay, who warmed his hands, laughed at his jokes, slept next to him, curled up in a ball. But Lindsay died maybe a year ago, maybe earlier. And this one deserves it. She lied to his face, slept with someone else, called him nothing. A real man, she said, and now he looked at her as if she were a stranger, someone who had dug a hole for herself. Lindsay suddenly turned around as if she felt his gaze. Their eyes met for a second through the fog. She called out, Jake, but the voice did not reach. Jake didn't move. It was empty inside, like a workshop after closing. He didn't want to save her. I didn't want to scream. He thought only one thing, you deserve it. Her lies, her ridicule, her divorce, all this brought her here. And him too. Marge puffed on her cigarette, the smoke swirling in the air. She won't get you out, she said. And you too. Karma is a bitch, man. Loves fair deals. Everyone will get what they deserve. Jake watched Lindsay drown in the fog and felt only cold. Love burned out. There was emptiness left, and a quiet, heavy thought. Let him pay. He clenched his fists, but not from anger, but from something else, from justice that had finally come. Morning burst into Jake's house with gray light and the smell of wet earth. Ry Thompson, his workshop assistant, stood on the porch, knocking on the door. In his hands was a paper cup of coffee from the gas station, steam rising in the cold air. He was skinny, lanky, with disheveled hair and a habit of chewing toothpicks. Jake didn't answer, not yesterday when Ry called, not today when he decided to stop by. The workshop was supposed to open an hour ago, and the boss was missing. It wasn't like him. Ry pushed the door. It was not locked. The inside smelled of whiskey and something sour, as if food had turned sour on the stove. Buddy jumped out of the kitchen, barked, and wagged his tail. Ry sat down and patted the dog on the back of the neck. Where is your master, huh? He asked, but Buddy only licked his hand. He walked into the kitchen. On the table there is an overturned mug, a puddle of whiskey, and a frying pan with cold beans. Ry frowned. Jake wasn't the type to drink himself into oblivion. Even after the worst days, he held on. And here there is emptiness, as if life had flowed out of the house. And Lindsay was gone. Her coat, which usually hung by the door, was gone. Ry looked into the bedroom. The bed was rumpled on only one side. Weird, he muttered, chewing on a toothpick. He went out into the yard and noticed Doreen Kelly, a neighbor who was always hanging out at the fence with a mug of coffee and gossip. She was small, hunched, with eyes like a crow. She sees everything, knows everything. Ry waved his hand at her. Hey, Mrs. Kelly, have you seen Jake? Doreen hobbled closer, coffee splashing in her mug. The morning was cold, but the smell of her drink strong, with cinnamon overpowered the dampness. She glanced at the house and squinted. I haven't seen you since the evening, she said, her voice hoarse, like an old record. And Lindsay was exhausted yesterday like she was scalded. I heard her slam the door. The glass almost flew out. Are you tired? Ry spat out the toothpick. Where? Doreen chuckled and pursed her lips. Where? To your boyfriend, I suppose. I saw her a couple of times with this Trevor so tall, with a watch like a mafia boss. They were sitting in a car near a store 3 weeks ago. She whispered in his ear, and he grinned. Their marriage had been cracking for a long time, boy. Everyone knew this, apparently everyone except Jake. Ry stood still, digesting. Trevor. The name popped up like mud in a puddle. He had heard about it from clients, some businessman who was buying up old workshops like the one where Jake worked. A slippery guy with money and the habits of a shark. Are you serious? He asked, looking at Doreen. Otherwise, she nodded, taking a sip of coffee. Lindsay hasn't been herself in recent months. The phone is always in your hands, it's late to go home, or you don't even spend the night at all. I hinted to Jake once, like, look after your wife, and he just waved his hand. That's her job. a gullible fool. Rye clutched the glass, the coffee burning his fingers. He remembered Lindsay coming into the studio a couple of months ago, all dressed up, in heels and red lipstick. She smiled at him, said, "Is Jake there?" and left without waiting for an answer. Then he didn't attach any importance, but now. Did she dump him? He asked, more for himself. She threw it, Doreen snorted. And she didn't just throw me away, she poked her with her nose like a puppy. Yesterday, I heard her yelling before leaving something about divorce and a real man. Jake was silent as a fish. Rye glanced at the house. The silence was oppressive. Even Buddy became quiet, burying his nose in the grass. The smell of coffee mixed with dampness, but there was something else in the air, anxiety, heavy as smoke from a fire. He had known Jake for 3 years. He was as simple as a wrench, but reliable. Lindsay, she always looked down on him. "We need to find him," said Rye, stepping towards the door. "Maybe he's in the workshop." "Look," Doreen said, narrowing her eyes. "I just sense that not everything is clean here." Jake's eyes were like those of a man standing on the edge yesterday. Rye nodded, but found no answer. He entered the house, feeling anxiety tightening his chest. "We need to find him. We can't leave a friend in trouble." Lindsay walked through the streets of Carmaville. Glass pricked her bare feet, but she gritted her teeth and walked on. She could not realize this was happening to her. The fog parted, and a motel appeared in front of her with a flashing vacancy sign, like a million others where she had been with Trevor. The door creaked, opening on its own, and she entered. Inside was not just a motel, but a labyrinth, endless corridors, identical doors. The smell of cigarettes and sweat hung in the air, mixing with something sweet, like her perfume. Marge stood at the entrance, blowing smoke, and grinned. "First test, baby," she said, pointing her cigarette into the darkness. "Mirror of betrayal. Look and don't lie, karma senses lies." Lindsay snorted. "I'm not afraid," she said, but her voice trembled. She stepped into the corridor, and the walls came to life, mirrors, dozens, hundreds, from floor to ceiling. "She is in everyone, but not like now, but with Trevor." His hands on her hips, his lips on her neck, her laugh loud, angry, victorious. Lindsay froze as she looked at the first scene, a motel near the highway 3 months ago. She sat on his lap, he whispered something to her, and she laughed, tearing off his shirt. "Jake is waiting at home with dinner," she then told Trevor, grinning. "Imagine his face, he's sitting with that beam of his, like an idiot, waiting for me." Trevor laughed and poked her in the side. "Poor cuckold. Maybe he should take a dog as his wife." "Already sometimes it seems to me that he loves her more than me," she answered, and they both laughed, falling onto the bed. The mirror screamed in her voice, and Lindsay recoiled. But the corridor did not let go. The next door, the next mirror. Now Trevor's apartment, a month ago. She stood by the window, naked, with a glass of wine, while he smoked on the sofa. "He really thinks I'm at work," she said, twirling the glass in her fingers. "Blind fool. 10 years, and I haven't noticed how worthless he is." "You trained him well?" Trevor chuckled, and she nodded, pleased with herself. The mirror squealed, reflecting her grin, and Lindsay clenched her fists. "It's not me," she shouted, but her voice was drowned in the chorus of other scenes. They came one after another: motels, cars, his office. She lies to Jake. "I'll be late. I'm tired. Don't wait up." She whispers to Trevor, "He's a nobody. Weakling. You're better." And laughter, always this laughter, sharp as the knife with which she cut their marriage. Lindsay spun around, trying to find a way out, but the mirrors were advancing, screaming her words. The smell of sex and cigarettes was choking. Sweat ran down my back. My underwear stuck to my body. "Enough," she yelled, knocking on the glass. The reflection cracked, but did not break. She pressed her forehead against the cold surface, breathing heavily. "It's not my fault," she muttered. "Everyone does it. It's not a crime." The mirrors began to hum, a low hum that chilled me to the bone. A voice not hers, not Trevor's, but someone else's thundered, "Admit it." Lindsay shook her head. "No, it's his own fault. Weakling nonentity. I just wanted to live." But the mirrors were not silent. They showed the last scene yesterday at Trevor's. She lay on him, laughing, shouting, "Jake is zero, zero everywhere," Trevor chimed in. "Give him the key as a souvenir." And she laughed until she choked. The mirror screamed so loudly that Lindsay fell to her knees, covering her ears. Jake watched from the darkness of Carmaville, standing next to Marge. He saw everything, every laugh, every word, every blow to who he was. Her voice was cutting, but there was no pain in her chest, only emptiness, cold and heavy. He saw how she laughed at him while he was waiting for her at home, how she called him nothing while she pleased another. Deserved it, he thought, and the thought lay as smooth as concrete. Lindsay raised her head, tears streaming down her face, but not from regret, from anger, fear. "Okay," she shouted, looking into the cracked mirror. "It's my fault. I betrayed him. Are you satisfied?" The mirrors fell silent. The rumble died down, the corridor shrank, and one door opened black as night. Lindsay stood up, unsteadily, and stepped towards her, glancing back. She thought she saw Jake's silhouette in the darkness, but she turned away. She didn't need him neither then nor now. Jake watched her go, clenching his fists. Marge puffed on her cigarette. "First confession," she said, "but karma has only just begun." He nodded without looking away. Her laughter still rang in his ears, but he felt nothing, neither pity nor anger. Only emptiness and quiet confidence. She deserved it, and he wanted to see what would happen next. Lindsay walked out of the Maze Motel, the door slamming behind her with a thud. The glass streets of Carmaville glitter under her feet, but now the fog parted, and another scene rose before her, the familiar high-rise in downtown Chicago, Trevor's apartment. Only it was not an apartment, but a distorted version of it. The windows were black like sinkholes, the walls were flowing like tar, the air was shaking with a low, ticking sound, tick-tock, tick-tock. Lindsay stepped inside, and the floor beneath her shook as if alive. Marge stood at the entrance, the smoke from her cigarette swirling in a spiral. "Second test," she said, grinning. "Here karma digs deeper. You won't get away with it." Lindsay swallowed, but lifted her chin proudly. "I managed the first one," she said, "and I'll sort this out." Marge chuckled, but remained silent. Lindsay walked further, and the ticking became louder, sharper, like a pulse in her ears. In the center of the room stood a shadow, tall, blurry, with a blank face. In place of the eyes were two golden dials. The hands were spinning at breakneck speed. Trevor. She recognized him by this watch, expensive, shiny, which he wore like a trophy. Only now it was not a hand, but a black haze, and the ticking beat on the nerves. "Lindsay," the shadow rustled. The voice was his, but distorted, like from an old radio. "You are mine." She trembled and stepped back, but the floor tightened, not letting her go. "What are you?" she exhaled, clenching her fists. The shadow moved, stretched out, and a scene flashed in front of it like a movie on a black screen. She and Trevor met in his office 6 months ago. He sat at the table, twisted his pen. She stood nearby, leafing through papers. Jake's contract is a large order to repair trucks for a local company. She found it in her husband's drawer and brought it to Trevor, grinning. "Here it is," she said then, pointing her finger at the numbers. "If you intercept him, Jake will lose everything. He's finished." Trevor smiled and ran his hand along her back. "Clever girl." The scene changed. Trevor calls the customer, intercepts the contract, and Jake is in the workshop scratching his head, looking at the empty yard. Lindsay then laughed as he complained, "I don't know what happened, Lynn. They just disappeared." And she nodded, hiding a smile, and thought, "You deserve it, weakling." The shadow stepped closer. The ticking became unbearable, like a hammer on glass. "You betrayed him not only by me," she whispered. "You stole his life. But I can get you out. The deal is simple. Say he beat you. One word and you're free." Lindsay froze, a trembling running through her body. She imagined Trevor alive, warm, with his grin and the smell of cologne. And then Jake, with his tired eyes and dirty hands. She could have lied. One word and the end of this nightmare. The shadow whispered, "You are mine," and the dials blinked, counting down the seconds. "No," she blurted out, unexpectedly even for herself. She clenched her teeth, looking into the blank face. I won't. He didn't hit me. He was. He just was. The shadow hissed like hot iron in water. Then pay, she whispered, and the dials flashed, blinding. Trevor disintegrated into black smoke, but the ticking remained, echoing in the walls. The floor cracked and Lindsay fell to her knees, gasping for air. The door ahead opened, black as an abyss, and she crawled towards it, without looking back. Jake watched from the darkness of Carmaville, standing next to Marge. He saw everything: how she handed over the contract, how she laughed at his failure, how Trevor smirked as he took his work. The emptiness in my chest trembled and was replaced by shock, cold, heavy, like a hammer blow. This was not just betrayal. She not only slept with someone else, she ruined his life, step by step, and laughed about it. He remembered how 6 months ago he lost that order, the best of the year. Came home, said, "We can handle it, Lynn." And she nodded, hiding her eyes, and went to bed. Now he knew why. Marge puffed on her cigarette, the smoke swirling in the air. "This is it, boy," she said. The scale of her crap. Shock, right? Jake nodded, clenching his fists. He felt no pity, only emptiness and something new, like ice in his veins. She deserved it, not just for Trevor, but for everything. For the lie, for the contract, for every time he believed her. He watched her crawl towards the door and thought, pay, Lindsay, pay for everything. Rye stood in Jake's kitchen, looking at the empty house. The morning had long passed midday, but the light was gray and dim, as if the sun had decided not to try. Buddy was spinning at his feet, poking his nose into the empty bowl, and Rye was scratching the back of his head, chewing on a new toothpick. Jake disappeared, not in the workshop, not on the phone, nowhere. After Doreen's gossip about Lindsay and Trevor, there was only one question in my head. What the hell is going on here? He slammed the cabinet door, poured some water for Buddy, and decided to check the basement. The descent was narrow, the steps creaked under the sneakers like old bones. The basement smelled of dust, mold, and something metallic, like a workshop after a long day. Rye flicked the switch, and the light flickered and came on, casting a yellow light onto the concrete walls. The shelves are littered with junk, rusty cans, old tires, boxes labeled Lindsay's clothes. He kicked one, something glass tinkled inside, but he did not dig. His gaze fell on an old chest in the corner, wooden, with peeling paint and a rusty lock that had not been closed for a long time. Rye sat down and opened the lid. Inside are old photographs, yellowed newspapers, a coil of rope. And on top is a thick, leather-bound notebook with the faded inscription, Edna Carter. Jake's grandmother. He heard about her from his boss, a strict old woman who kept her family in her fist. Rye took the notebook and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was sharp, angular, as if she had carved the words with a knife. March 15th, 1972. He went to her. Karma will find him. My heart started beating. Rye sat down on the concrete, scrolling further. The basement suddenly became more crowded. Dust settled on his shoulders. The light was blinking, and it seemed to him that someone was looking from the corner. He shook his head, driving away the delirium, and read. Edna wrote briefly, but every word hit like a nail. March 20th, 1972. William thought I wouldn't recognize him. 20 years of marriage, and he was running to this bitch from the next street. I saw them in the car at the bar. He laughed like a fool, and she pulled at his sleeve. I said, repay the debt to those who were betrayed. He left, slamming the door. Rye frowned. Edna's words were familiar. Jake had muttered them once when he was drunk after a fight with Lindsay. He scrolled further, dust sticking to his fingers and his throat dry. Paradise froze and reread it. Carmaville? It sounded like nonsense, but a chill ran down my spine. He remembered Doreen, her words about something was wrong. The light blinked again, and the shadow in the corner moved tall, thin, like an old woman with a stick. He jumped up, dropping his notebook, but there was no one there. Only dust swirled in the light. The door upstairs slammed, and Rye rushed towards the sound. Doreen stood in the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee as Buddy barked towards her. Why are you yelling? she asked, narrowing her eyes. I didn't yell, Rye breathed, clutching the diary. Found this. Edna, Jake's grandmother. He writes something about some Carmaville and about his cheating husband. Doreen stepped closer and glanced at the notebook. Her eyes narrowed, like a cat's before jumping. Give it here, she said, snatching the diary. She leafed through it, muttering to herself, until she stopped on the same page. Karma took him away for treason, she read aloud. Damn it, I knew it. Knew what? Rye clenched his fists. The basement still pressed, as if Edna was standing behind her. Edna was more than just an old woman, Doreen said, taking a sip of her coffee. She was like a witch, but without a broom. Everyone was afraid of her tongue. She would say a word, and there would be trouble. When William disappeared, everyone whispered that she had done something to him. And now, she glanced at the empty house. Jake inherited it. His words, his anger. Lindsay left, and he did something. Did what? Rye stepped towards her. His voice broke. Are you talking about this K. Armaville? I don't know what it is, Doreen snapped, but I feel like it's real. Jake was not himself yesterday. His eyes were empty, like those of a dead man. And Lindsay, she betrayed him, like William betrayed Edna. Rye stared at her, digesting. Jake and Lindsay's marriage was cracking, as Doreen said, but there was more to it. Edna wrote about betrayal, about debt, and now Jake is missing, and so is Lindsay. He remembered how Jake looked at his wife with faith, with warmth. Lindsay climbed out of the cracked floor of Trevor's apartment, the door slamming shut behind her like a coffin lid. The ticking of the golden watch still rang in her ears, but Carmaville gave her no respite. The fog thickened, the glass streets disappeared, and a house rose in front of her old, rickety, with peeling paint and creaking shutters. Her childhood home in the suburbs of Chicago, where she grew up with her sister Amy. Only now he looked dead. The windows were black holes, the porch was overgrown with weeds, and the air smelled of mold and cold, like an abandoned basement. Marge stood at the entrance, a cigarette smoldering in her fingers. The third test, she said, blowing smoke. Run if you want, but it won't work. Lindsay clenched her fists, her legs trembling. I won't run, she said, although her voice broke. She stepped towards the porch, and the door opened on its own, creaking like an old joint. It was dark inside, but familiar the smell of damp wood, the screams of parents somewhere in the distance, the echo of children's steps. She inhaled, and the memory struck like lightning. She was 12. Amy is 10. The sister was thin, with big eyes and a quiet voice, always shadowing Lindsay. They lived in this house cramped, with parents always quarreling. Her father screamed, her mother cried, and Lindsay learned to survive by taking what she wanted. Amy was just there silent, watching, believing her sister, and it pissed Lindsay off. The room came to life in front of her, their bedroom, 2 beds, faded wallpaper with flowers. Lindsay stood by the window, small, with disheveled hair, clutching the money she had stolen from her mother's bag. Amy sat on the bed, looking at her. Did you take them without asking? She asked, her voice trembling. Shut up, Lindsay said, chewing on some candy. Nobody will know. But the mother found out. That evening she burst into the room, her eyes red from crying. Who took it? They're missing from the bag, she shouted, and Lindsay froze. Amy looked up, but didn't say anything. Lindsay knew that her sister wouldn't betray her. Amy always had her back, and she took advantage of it. This is Amy, she said, pointing her finger. I saw her rummaging through her bag. The mother turned to the youngest and grabbed her hand. You? She barked, and Amy shook her head, but her voice was drowned in tears. Don't lie to me. Lindsay stood there, watching her sister cry, feeling empty inside. She felt no guilt, only relief. She wasn't caught. She won. The scene dissolved. The cold penetrated to the bones. The screams of the parents echoed in the walls. She stepped towards Amy's bed, and the air thickened. A shadow rose from under the blanket, small, thin, with bruises under its eyes. Amy. Her hair hung in icicles, her skin was white as paper, and her voice was quiet but sharp like a needle. You betrayed me, she said, looking straight at Lindsay. You betrayed everyone. Lindsay backed away and tripped over a chair. It was just one time, she shouted. I was a child. Amy stepped closer, and the room shook. More than once, she whispered. Scenes flashed around like old slides. Lindsay, 15 years old, steals money from Amy's wallet to buy a dress. Lindsay, 17, blames her sister for the broken vase while she remains silent under her father's screams. Lindsay, 20, leaves home, leaving Amy with her drunken parents without looking back. And then the last one. Amy dies. She fell into depression and no one helped her get out. Lindsay learned about this later from her mother, but did not come to the funeral. You left me, Amy said, and her voice became louder, harsher. You took it, and I paid. You lived, and I died. Lindsay collapsed to her knees, the cold of the floor burning her skin. I didn't want to, she shouted, but the words sounded empty. She remembered Jake, how he waited for her with dinner, how he trusted her, how she laughed at him with Trevor. It was the same. She took his love, his trust, his life, and gave it to others. Amy looked at her, and there was no anger in her eyes, only pain deep, like a well. You can redeem, Amy said, holding out her hand. Give yourself over. For me. Or live with it. Lindsay began to tremble, tears streaming down her face, hot, angry, the first ones in years. She remembered her sister. Amy was better, cleaner, and Lindsay broke her. And Jake, and everyone who came along the way. She looked at her sister's hand, thin, pale, trembling, and for the first time felt something sharp, like a knife in her chest. Guilt. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's my fault. I betrayed everyone. She reached out and touched Amy's fingers, and the chill went straight to her bones. Take me. For you. Amy nodded, and the light flashed white, blinding. The room shook, the walls cracked, and the screams of the parents fell silent. Lindsay fell, closing her eyes, feeling something tearing inside not her body, but her soul, heavy with everything she had done. When the light faded, she lay on the floor alone. Amy disappeared, but the cold remained in silence, echoing like an empty house. Jake watched from the darkness of Carmaville, next to Marge. He saw everything Lindsay betrayed, not only him, it was her path, her essence. She cried, but he did not believe these tears. Deserved it, he thought, and the thought was cold as steel. Her atonement did not change anything, the debt was too great. Marge puffed on her cigarette. She chose this path herself. Boy, Marge said to him, karma likes fair deals. Did you want her to pay? So she pays and will pay for the rest of her life. Marge's words bounced off the walls of the Carmenville labyrinth and echoed back into the cold wind, mixing with the glass chips on the roads. Jake clenched his fists, trying to hold on. It seemed to him that the fog had thickened to the limit, that the whole world had become a ghost, except for him and this strange guide. What now? He asked hoarsely, barely moving his tongue. She passed 3 tests. Will karma give her a way out? Marge exhaled smoke through her crooked grin. Exit? She repeated, as if tasting the word. Karma will decide what's best for her. Maybe he'll leave him here forever, or maybe he'll spit him back out into reality. But what do you care about? You wanted revenge to repay the debt, and now it has happened. He stepped back. Marge, as if sensing this movement, covered him with her elbow. Karma gave you the role of spectator. You are neither judge nor executioner here, Jake, she said. And now your time is up. Say goodbye. You are no longer needed here. The wind whistled, mixing cigarette smoke with fog. For a moment, Jake thought that the shadow in the corner of the street was taking on the shape of a stern old woman, his grandmother Edna, who whispered familiar words, repay the debt to those who betrayed. Scenes flashed before my eyes, Lindsay walking out into the rain, slamming the door, his workshop empty from lack of orders after her lover intercepted the most important contract, Buddy bored in a house where there is no more heat, his own hands, smelling of motor oil, clenched to white knuckles. Go, Marge said. This place lets you go. Before Jake could answer, a sheet of fog moved towards him, closing in on him like a transparent wall. He stepped back and caught Lindsay's eye. She, too, had seen karma take him. For a moment, A pleading flashed in her eyes, or maybe fear he didn't have time to figure it out. The fog closed and Carmaville disappeared. Jake jerked and opened his eyes. He sat in his own kitchen with his head resting on his folded hands. The lamp above the table blinked, plunging the room either into darkness or into a yellowish half-light. A gray dawn could be seen through the window. Buddy whined pitifully at his feet. Damn. Jake just exhaled, squeezing his eyes shut and trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. His heart was pounding as if he had run a marathon. Whiskey from an overturned mug spread across the tabletop in a sticky puddle. Buddy, Jake whispered and ran his hand over the dog's head. We're the only ones here, right? The dog yelped as if in agreement. Jake stood up, his legs shaking. I looked at the clock on the wall, 6:15 m. No matter how foggy and scary the night visions seemed to him, the dawn now stood before him very concretely. Cold light filtered through the windows, and the empty house seemed to have lost its former warmth. Lindsay wasn't there, and he didn't feel her presence, as if something inside told him. She wouldn't come, at least. She wouldn't cross this threshold as a wife again. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with his wrist. Karma flashed through my head, if it really happened. Or maybe I just got drunk and had a nightmare. But there was one more strange piece of evidence. On the floor, right next to the door to the bedroom, there was an old yellow ticket, the one he had seen in Carmenville. Controller, one end, the crooked letters appeared in the twilight. Jake slowly bent down and picked up the ticket. He smelled damp and earthy, as if he was lying in some kind of basement, or in another world. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. "Oh, fuck you," he muttered, pushing the piece of paper into his pocket. So it wasn't just a drunken hallucination. Jake heard someone knocking on the door. "Hey, boss, are you there?" It was Rye, his assistant, a lanky guy with a toothpick always sticking out of his mouth. By the look of it, you can tell that he didn't sleep all night and was now nodding off. Or maybe he was looking for his missing boss until the morning. Jake wanted to answer, but didn't have time. Rye had already burst inside, repeating, "Jake, buddy, what the hell?" "Oh, thank God, I found it." He looked around, wincing at the sight of overturned bottles, leftover beans in the frying pan, and an empty mug. "Damn, have you been drinking all night?" Rye waved his hands. "I'm already going crazy. Where have you been?" "I looked, the workshop is closed. The light is on at home, but you don't open it. You don't answer. I was already thinking about what happened. And Lindsay." Rye stopped short when he saw that same empty, heavy look in Jake's eyes. That same silence that cannot be unraveled by ordinary questions. "Paradise," Jake said quietly, sinking into a chair. Rye put the coffee he had brought from the car onto the table and kicked the empty bottle. It rolled towards the refrigerator. "You never answered me," he repeated, sitting down. "Where have you been? And what was going on here anyway?" Jake ran his hand over his face. "Tell the truth? Karma, ghosts, damn tests." Paradise is unlikely to believe in such things, but he felt that he needed to speak out, at least to someone. "Lindsay left me," he began bluntly, "last night, and, well, there was a lot going on here." "I know," Rye nodded. "The neighbor said that she screamed, slammed the door, and left." Jake nodded, feeling the pulse in his temples give off a dull ache. He himself saw much more than he would like. "But that's not all," he continued. After she left, I got drunk. And, the old words of the grandmother, repay the debt to those who betrayed." Rye tensed, bit the toothpick. "Wait, I found something." He looked around and fished out of his jacket the same diary Edna had found in the basement chest. "Look, I was looking for you around the house, and I found this, and read it. And it is terribly consonant with what you are saying now." Jake saw a familiar name, Edna Carter. My heart skipped a beat. The same words, Carmaville, repay the debt. He ran his eyes over the notes. His hand itself squeezed the page, as if trying to make it all come true. "This is all. I don't know how to explain it to you, Rye," Jake said, shaking his head. "At night, I felt like I got there." He fell silent, looking away. Paradise was silent, listening, and Buddy whined quietly, feeling the tension. I have a ticket here. Jake continued, taking out a yellowish piece of paper. He just appeared at the bedroom door, smelling of darkness and dampness. I don't know, Paradise. Maybe I'm going crazy, or maybe this is all real. Rye sighed, looking first at the diary and then at the ticket. Look, I'm not some kind of supernatural expert, right? But your grandmother. According to rumors, she was an evil lady with quirks. If she believed in something, it could come true, more than once. He closed the notebook. Let's do it this way. Now let's do this. Let's stop talking about ghosts and karma drink. Well, better, something stronger than coffee, because it looks like you need to relax a little. You're shaking all over, boss. Jake smiled wryly as he stood up. Yes, come on. Although I already had too much whiskey, it seems. Okay, Rye waved his hand. It's okay. A couple of drinks and off to bed. And in the morning, with a fresh mind, we'll see what to do. We have work to do, client's right, call. But I backed up and said that you were sick. Jake nodded and thanked him with a look. Thank you, Rye. Is it true? You are the only one left. He wanted to say, with me, but the words got stuck in his throat. He patted him on the shoulder. Come on, boss. We are a team, have you forgotten? They tidied up the kitchen a little, they put away the bottles, poured out the cooled beans, wiped their whiskey. At the same time, they did not talk about Lindsay. Jake is too tired to even be angry. As soon as they finished, Rye sat down on the sofa, taking off his sneakers, and Jake leafed through the diary. Listen, boss, said Rye, let's go to the bedroom. At least you'll stretch out for a couple of hours. I've been working for you in the workshop for half a day already. I'm tired as a dog. Maybe I'll take a nap somewhere. Jake wanted to agree, but suddenly a sound came from the corridor leading to the bedroom, a quiet, muffled sound, as if someone was rubbing the latch. Both turned around at the same time. Did you hear that? Rye was wary. Yes, Jake clenched his teeth. Looks like someone is there. Who? After all, Lindsay is gone, the house is empty. Something snapped inside Jake. Has she really returned? Or is it the damn ghost again? They slowly moved towards the bedroom. Buddy followed them, ears pricked and growling. When Jake pushed the door, there was no one there. Only in the light of the street lamp was a silhouette visible against the wall. The first thing Jake heard the next morning was the rumble of thunder somewhere far away, outside the window. He opened his eyes and saw the gray sky hanging over the suburbs of Chicago, ready to burst into rain at any second. Rye was asleep, curled up on the other side of the sofa. Buddy had apparently already woken up and was now sitting by the window, warily looking out into the yard where the wind was rising. While Jake and Rye were wandering around the house, trying to understand the consequences of the mysterious night, on the other side of the city, in a luxurious penthouse, Trevor McClintock was awakened by loud screams. Lynn? Trevor raised himself on his elbow, shaking his blonde hair. Damn, what are these screams? I have a meeting in an hour. Lindsay stood in the corner of the room, clutching the sheet to her chest, as if she were cold, although Trevor's apartment was always kept at a stable 22 degrees. Her eyes darted feverishly, horror froze on her face. No, 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 she muttered, as if trying to shake something off her skin. This is impossible. I was there. Carmaville. Trevor grimaced. What are you talking about? I lay with you, you were fine, and now you're screaming like crazy. Lindsay recalled her last moments in Carmenville. She passed 3 tests, saw her sister's ghost, cried, confessed her guilt, and then she was swallowed up by a bright light. And so I woke up in this apartment, with the appearance and smell of Trevor, who habitually breathed next to me in his sleep. She whispered, I remember exactly. I screamed, walked along these streets of glass. And Marge. Who is Marge? Trevor said irritably, getting off the bed. Fucking Lindsay, I have a meeting with investors today. I can't deal with your nightmares. He turned on the coffee maker, took a bottle of juice out of the refrigerator, and drank almost half of it in one gulp. Lindsay pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to stop the dizziness. Was it really just a dream? she repeated painfully in her head. But why then did images of Amy, the motel, and Trevor the shadow with knocking dials instead of eyes still flash before my eyes? She also remembered seeing Jake in the fog. "Are you listening to me?" Trevor raised his voice. "I'm asking if everything is okay." Lindsay looked at him as he was, tall, self-confident. Just the sight of him still made something sweetly swell inside her. He was the real man with whom she ran away from Jake. But now she felt strangely uneasy. In Carmaville's memories, Trevor appeared in the form of a cold shadow that hissed, "You are mine." And this image still did not let go. I, I don't know, she wrapped her arms around herself. Maybe I need a doctor. I feel like I'm going crazy. Trevor fell silent and exhaled, as if trying to find calm. He walked up to Lindsay and put his hands on her shoulders. "Listen, baby," he said softer. "It's just a bad dream. You lost your temper yesterday because of Jake. Apparently your conscience is tormenting you." She shuddered. "Conscience? I have no conscience." She blurted out, as if these were words from scenes from Carmaville. Tears welled up in her eyes. Before her were pictures of how she mocked Jake, called him Zero, how she laughed with Trevor at the cuckold. "Come on, be quiet." Trevor shook her slightly, frowning. "Do you regret something?" "Don't know," Lindsay shouted, breaking away from his hands. "He was too faithful and good to me, and I was confused." Trevor raised his eyebrows. "Listen, we don't need this. You chose me, right? We are together. I give you the life you dreamed of. Money, success, status. And Jake is the past." "Yes," she nodded automatically. "Maybe." Trevor sighed and kissed her forehead. "So calm down. If you're afraid that someone will find out that we squeezed the contract out of them, forget it. I've covered everything. Okay, I'll leave you. It's time for me to get ready." He headed to the shower. Lindsay sank onto her bed, replaying nightmares in her head. "It's just a dream," she convinced herself. "We need to pull ourselves together." But the cats were scratching in my chest. There in Carmaville, it was as if she saw the darkest side of her soul and was afraid. And now I felt that this darkness had not gone away. Trevor left for a meeting, leaving her alone in a spacious apartment with glass walls and a view of downtown Chicago. Lindsay pulled off her silk robe and walked to the mirror, looking at her reflection. Her dark hair was disheveled, there were circles under her eyes, and she looked scared. And suddenly it seemed to her that someone else was reflected in the mirror, the same face that she had seen in Carmaville, with black holes instead of eyes. She screamed, recoiling. The mirror showed her normal face again, but her heart was pounding as if it was about to burst her chest. She rummaged in her purse and found a smartphone. On the screen, there is a notification about missed calls. There was nothing from Jake, of course, and from whom should he call? He will probably curse her now. And Lindsay herself desperately wanted to call him. For what? The question immediately asked inside. After all, she left. She threw humiliating words in his face, ending a 10-year marriage. But the memory of those years when they lived modestly but amicably suddenly came back like a wave. Their wedding, cheap but fun, renovations to their small home, the old sofa on which they laughed, watched movies, dreamed. "You betrayed me," Jake's voice from Carmaville sounded in my ears, hoarse and full of emptiness. Lindsay took a shuddering breath, her fingers trembling. She felt very bad, and her vision darkened. The smartphone fell out of my hands. "Help," she whispered before falling to her knees, clutching the carpet. Jake and Rye opened the workshop a little later than usual, around 9 in the morning. A dissatisfied customer was already standing at the gate, a man in a cap who just yesterday wanted to pick up a repaired pickup truck. "Come on, guys. This is the third time I've come, and everything is closed." He was indignant. Rye took it upon himself to explain. "Sorry, we have force majeure. But the pickup is ready. It was just lying on the stocks unattended. Now we'll quickly check it, and you can take it." Jake silently walked deeper into the workshop. The smell of machine oil, metal, rubber, all this was familiar. It was here that he felt at ease. He performed a quick diagnostic, told the owner that the car was fine, and took payment. When the client left, Rye turned to Jake. Well, life goes on, boss. Look, if a couple more clients come along, you'll see that the month won't be so hungry. Yes, Jake responded sadly. I hope so. They took on the remaining orders. Gradually, the workshop came to life with the clatter of tools, the murmur of the radio, gusts of wind that brought the smell of rain. Jake tried to concentrate on his work, putting the car on a lift, tightening the nuts, changing the oil. But images of the night kept popping up before his eyes. Over and over he asked himself, what about Lindsay? Was she still there? Or did she come back like me? But there was no evidence. Toward lunch, they sat down to rest for a minute, tired and dirty. Jake thoughtfully twirled the bottle of soda in his hands. Rye was about to say something, but their conversation was interrupted by a phone call. The device was lying on a table at the entrance. Jake picked up the phone. Carter's workshop, I'm listening. Jake, an excited voice rang out a woman's. This is Maggie, the secretary from Rockland Trucks. Remember us? Rockland Trucks is the same company whose contract Jake was cunningly stolen 6 months ago. The order then suddenly passed into the hands of a certain intermediary, and Jake was left with nothing. Yes, I remember, he became wary. So, we wanted to talk to you. There have been some changes. Maggie's voice sounded tense. Can you come to us today? Say by 4. The boss wants to discuss the terms of the renovation contract. Jake exchanged a glance with Rye, who also raised his eyebrows. Of course, said Jake, I'll be there by 4. He hung up, thinking this might all be some kind of prank. Paradise reached out. Well, maybe this company has decided to return, or maybe they needed a new contractor. I have no idea, Jake admitted. But this is a real chance, Rye. If they want to renew the contract, that will save us. Hell yes, Rye rejoiced, blowing a drop of sweat from his forehead. Then we'll keep working, and we'll drop by to see them at 4. Meanwhile, tension reigned in the Rockland Trucks office. Their finance department conducted an unscheduled review of contracts, and the name of Trevor McClintock came up, the same entrepreneur who, thanks to Lindsay's help, took the order away from Jake's workshop 6 months ago. The results of the audit were shocking: forgery of papers, false estimates, kickbacks, and other fraud. The CEO, Mr. Rockwell, was furious to discover that Trevor had been fleecing their firm for months, overbilling for non-existent repairs and setting up fictitious subcontractors. The police were called and the documents were handed over to the prosecutor's office. Things moved quickly because the amounts were large. Closer to noon, 2 plainclothes police officers were already standing on the threshold of Trevor's office with a search warrant. But he himself was not there, he was at the morning negotiations. The secretary, seeing the tokens, immediately contacted Trevor to warn him, but came across an answering machine. When Trevor returned to his office around 1 p.m., happy and having signed a couple of new deals, men in uniform blocked his way. Under the glare of his colleagues, who only yesterday idolized him for his strong character, Trevor was led to a table, informed of suspicion of fraud, and read his rights. He swore, trying to call someone to hush up the matter, but the phone slipped out of his hands. This morning, he left Lindsay in his apartment, deciding that she simply had some personal problems, and now he himself found himself in the midst of a disaster. You have no right, he shouted as he was handcuffed. I have connections. This is a mistake. Where is my lawyer? But the lawyer was exactly 2 minutes late. Trevor was already in the police car, flushed, in shock, not understanding how his world was in danger of collapse so quickly. Around noon, Lindsay, who had never recovered from a terrible panic attack, decided to call Trevor, but his phone was not answering. She walked around the apartment, wrapped in a robe, almost unable to find a place for herself. The wind was howling outside, rain was gathering, and gray clouds seemed to hang right over the glass walls of the penthouse. She tried to drink water, but her hands were shaking. Visions of shards of glass underfoot, the city of Carmenville, the ghost of Amy, the cold voice of Marge appeared before my eyes. At some point, she screamed, dropping the glass. The fragments scattered and crashed into her bare foot. "Crap!" Lindsay screamed, grabbing the wall. No, no. The pain aroused even greater panic. She grabbed the phone, pressing the button to call an ambulance. Having waited for an answer, she muttered through sobs, "Help, I feel bad." The operator reacted instantly, sending the car. 15 minutes later, paramedics, who were let in by the concierge, burst into Trevor's apartment. They found Lindsay in a semi-conscious state. "Lord," one of the paramedics cursed quietly. "The guy left her, or what?" "I don't know," the paramedic girl responded, helping lift Lindsay. "Looks like a nervous breakdown and a wound on the foot." Lindsay muttered incomprehensible phrases. "Carmaville. This is not a dream. Amy, I'm sorry." The doctors had to inject a sedative. On the stretcher, she almost didn't understand where she was. Only tears flowed down my cheeks, and my lips whispered, "Jake, I betrayed you. I'm sorry." "Quiet, quiet, everything will be all right," the orderly persuaded her, although he himself was not sure that there was anything more wrong with her than shock. Just before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Jake pulled up to the glass office building of Rockland Trucks. He straightened his work jacket, which didn't look particularly presentable, but he didn't have anything else. It was too spontaneous a call. Rye stayed outside in the car so as not to light up too much. In the reception room on the second floor, the same Maggie with whom he had spoken on the phone was waiting for him. A short girl, nervously fiddling with her pen, recognized him, nodded, and led him along the corridor to the boss's office. "Mr. Rockwell is already waiting," she said with a hint of excitement. At a massive table sat a man of about 50, serious, in a suit. There are a couple more people nearby, the company's lawyer and someone from the management. "Come in, sit down, Mr. Carter." Rockwell pointed to a chair. "I thank you for coming so quickly." Jake sat down, trying to keep his back straight, although he was filled with doubt and excitement inside. "I'm surprised by your invitation," he admitted honestly. "6 months ago, you could say, you refused my services." "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss," Rockwell nodded, folding his hands on the table. "During an internal audit, it turned out that our previous contractor, Mr. McClintock, deceived us. His documents were forged, and we found out that initially we planned to cooperate with you until, let's say, a third party intervened in the matter." Jake nodded, understanding that we were talking about Trevor and Lindsay. "We apologize to you," Rockwell continued, "and we hope that you will not refuse to consider the opportunity to become our official truck repair and maintenance contractor." The mention of an apology from such a large company as Rockland Trucks sounded almost like fantasy. Jake coughed, feeling that his usual voice was gone. "Of course, I'm ready. This is a great honor and opportunity for me." "Great," the lawyer took the floor. "Here is a sample contract. We would like to discuss the conditions, terms, volumes, cost. Of course, we understand that you could have changed your prices within 6 months. Once we agree on all the details, the contract can be signed." Jake glanced at the long list of items. For his small workshop, this meant work for months, if not years, ahead, and good money that will allow you to invest in new equipment. And the very fact of cooperation with a company of this level spoke volumes. "I will, of course, be happy to conclude a contract," he finally said. "But I need a couple of days to estimate and prepare the documentation. I don't have a very big team, me and my assistant Rye." "No problem," Rockwell said, smiling encouragingly. "We understand that you need time, but I ask you not to delay too much. It is important for us to replace McClintock as quickly as possible." "I'll do my best," Jake assured. "And thank you. Here's to your chance." Shaking hands, they quickly agreed on the basic structure of the contract. On the way out, Maggie walked Jake to the elevator. "I'm glad everything turned out this way," she admitted. "When you came last year, I liked you. I mean, as a business person," she quickly corrected, embarrassed. "I know that you are a good mechanic." "Thank you, Maggie," Jake said quietly. "Listen, I wanted to ask, did you say Trevor was arrested?" The girl nodded. I see. Jake felt a mixed emotion, satisfaction and strange sadness. He said goodbye to Maggie and got into the car to see Paradise. He immediately responded, "Well, how did it go?" "Everything is fine," Jake said briefly, fastening his belt. "It seems the contract is ours. Final details are needed, but this is more than possible." Rye cursed cheerfully. "Boss, it's a bomb. Congratulations." "Thank you," Jake smiled, feeling that for the first time in the last 6 months, his heart felt a little lighter. Trevor was arrested. "Oh, how?" Rye whistled. "I didn't expect everything to open up so quickly. He's been running scams for so many months." Jake nodded. "Looks like karma has caught up with him. And Lindsay is now without him." Rye shrugged. "Maybe she'll find someone else. She's not one of those who sit still." Jake sighed. "Probably yes." He turned the ignition key and they drove back to the workshop, trying not to think too much. For the first time in a long time, the future looked more or less bright. When Lindsay woke up, there were white walls and a strong smell of disinfection. Several hours have passed since she was taken by ambulance. The wound on the foot was treated and bandaged, and injections were given for shock. Now she lay in a hospital room under the close attention of a nurse. "Can I get up?" she asked barely audibly, trying to lift her head from the pillow. "You better lie down for now." The sister, a plump, middle-aged woman, straightened Lindsay's pillow. "You are having a nervous breakdown. The doctor wants to observe you a little more." "Nervous breakdown?" Lindsay squeezed out a bitter smile. "A nervous breakdown compared to what I saw in Carmenville. These are flowers." "You said something about Carmenville," the sister noted, frowning. "Maybe it's just the name of some movie you watched." "No," Lindsay closed her eyes. "This is not a movie." She stopped short, looking out the window. There, behind the glass, torn wisps of rain clouds danced on the trees. There was a strange devastation in my soul, which at the same time bordered on fear. "I hate this hospital smell," she thought, shivering from the sharp autumn coolness. A man in a white coat and glasses entered the room, judging by his badge, a psychiatrist. "Hello, miss. I'm Dr. Rossi. How are you feeling?" "Not really," Lindsay answered honestly, trying not to cry in front of strangers. "My head is pounding. My heart is racing." "You were given a sedative to calm you down." "The nurse said you were talking about some streets, Carmaville, a strange place. Can you tell us more details?" Lindsay turned white. "If I start talking about ghosts, about Amy's sister, about shadows, about Marge, they'll think I'm completely crazy." "It's just a bad dream," she finally said, turning away. "Maybe I'm hallucinating because of stress." "You behaved extremely inappropriately," the doctor remarked softly, exchanging glances with the nurse. "We suspect a psychogenic episode, perhaps a reaction to severe shock." "Are you prone to panic attacks?" "Not before," Lindsay answered, rubbing her temples. "But lately." "I understand," the doctor made notes on the chart. "How long have you not slept properly or rested?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm afraid to fall asleep, to see these nightmares again." "Calm down. You need treatment and observation," the doctor concluded, putting away his pen. "We can offer you to stay with us for a few days. Your leg injury should also heal under medical supervision, and you will also be examined by our psychotherapist." "What?" Lindsay gasped, protest burning within her. "Do you want to leave me here?" "This is an ordinary hospital at the city hospital," the doctor said with emphasis. "But the psychiatry department. You will be helped, miss. Based on your symptoms, this is the best solution." Lindsay opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. In fact, she had nowhere to go. Trevor seemed to have disappeared. She didn't dare return to Jake. And then this fear that she will see shadows and ghosts again. "How long? How long will I have to be here?" she asked quietly. The doctor shrugged. "Depending on the situation. From a couple of days to a couple of weeks. Your condition is important." Lindsay closed her eyes. Suddenly, that final moment in Carmenville flashed back to me. The hand Amy had touched, cold and trembling. "I'm atonement for my guilt," she whispered then. Well, perhaps this is her payment to languish within the walls of a mental hospital, suffering from her sins. Okay, Lindsay whispered, afraid of herself. Do what you need to do. The next day, Jake woke up in his house feeling a little better. There were no visits from doubles overnight. He didn't drink whiskey, but went to bed early instead. Buddy was sleeping on the rug. Everything seemed calm. As usual, Doreen Kelly, a neighbor who was always aware of the latest gossip in the area, arrived at his doorstep around 9 in the morning. She knocked on the door with her cane and Jake opened it. "Hello, Doreen," he muttered, realizing that there was no way out of the conversation. "Hello, neighbor," she responded. "Do you know what happened? Yesterday, an ambulance was seen at that luxurious penthouse in the center. They carried out a woman. They say it's Lindsay, your beloved ex." Jake went cold. "Lindsay? Seriously? Where does the information come from?" "I know the concierge," Doreen grinned. "He said Lindsay was taken away unconscious. But Trevor himself seemed to have been taken away by the cops." Jake sighed, feeling his stomach ache. "Lindsay. In the ambulance, Trevor arrested. It turned out that their whole world collapsed overnight. So she's in the hospital," he said, looking away. "Okay, thanks for the news, Doreen." The woman narrowed her eyes. "Are you going to visit her?" "I don't know," Jake frowned. "She left on her own. What will I do there?" "Perhaps she is in trouble," Doreen said stubbornly. "I understand that she did some things. But you're a man, Jake. You won't leave her at a time like this, will you?" Jake pursed his lips. Two feelings were arguing inside him, anger and that same, who, if not me, she was once his wife, after 10 years of marriage, and no matter how terrible her betrayal was, he still did not wish her death or madness. "We'll see," he finally squeezed out. "Thank you, Doreen." She nodded, taking a couple steps away. Then she turned around. "Jake," she said quietly, "you're a good guy. Don't let bitterness destroy you completely." With these words, she left. Jake closed the door and leaned his back against the wall. The words, "repay the debt to those who betrayed," came to mind, followed by scenes from Carmaville. He clenched his fists. "No, I won't become like her," he thought. That same day, having avoided urgent matters in the workshop, Jake decided to go to the hospital. "Just make sure she's okay," he told himself. Right teased. "Maybe not, boss." But Jake felt he should. He found out which department Lindsay was in, a therapeutic building with psychiatric beds. As I walked up the stairs, I felt my heart pounding. What will I tell her? An elderly nurse sat at the end of the corridor. She asked who he was visiting, and he gave his last name. "Lindsay Carter." "Room 214, the sister answered, looking at the notes. "But keep in mind, she shouldn't worry." Jake nodded and knocked on the door. A dull knock sounded down the empty corridor. "Come in." A weak female voice was heard. It was Lindsay. Jake opened the door and saw her. She was lying on a white bed, and next to her was a bedside table with an Roman 4 and a glass of water. Her gaze darted to him, and a lot of emotions were reflected on her face. Surprise, shame, pain, fear. "Jake," she whispered, her fingers clenching into fists. He entered, carefully closed the door behind him, and noted that there were only 2 beds in the room, but the one next to it was empty. "Hello," he said, trying to speak calmly. "I found out that you are here." Lindsay began to cry. Tears flowed down her cheeks. She tried to jerk herself up, but immediately winced from the pain in her leg. "Hush," Jake raised his hand. "Don't get up." He came closer and saw that his leg was bandaged under the blanket. Lindsay clutched the sheet frantically. "You came," she sobbed. "Why?" "Doreen said you were taken away," Jake replied. "I couldn't just not check." She covered her face with her hands. "Lord, forgive me, Jake. I don't know what's wrong with me." Everything collapsed in an instant. "I know about Trevor," he nodded. "I heard that he was arrested." "Yes," she nodded, closing her eyes. "I just wanted a beautiful life." Jake looked down. "You helped him take my order too." "Yes," Lindsay shuddered. "It's my fault." I told him how to find the customer and helped him with the papers. I'm ashamed. I'm sorry. I... I don't know why I was like this. Jake exhaled heavily and sat down on the edge of the chair next to him. Lynn, I don't know why I'm here, he admitted. Maybe he wanted to make sure you were alive. Maybe he just wanted to understand. She looked up at him with tear-stained eyes. You're good, Jake. And I knew it, but I still hit you in the back. There was silence in the room. He didn't know what to say. A dull pain from betrayal beat in his chest, but at the same time he saw in front of him the woman whom he had once loved and who now lay broken, unhappy. I had nightmares, Lindsay said, lowering her eyes. Some streets made of glass, my sister Amy, whom I betrayed as a child, and your face. I walked there, cried, asked for forgiveness. Jake tensed. Carmaville? Lindsay winced. Yes, it was so real, but the doctors say that it was just hallucinations. Maybe not, he said quietly. I was there too. She looked at him, not believing. You too? So, this is not a figment of my imagination? Jake silently shook his head, making it clear that he was not joking. Lindsay grabbed the sheet. So it's all for real. I deserve this, right? For everything I've done. I didn't want anything bad to happen to you, Jake muttered, but I was too angry. Grandmother's words. In short, I don't know how to explain it. Lindsay started crying again, trying to keep it quiet. Forgive me. For everything. Don't ask me to explain why I was like this. Maybe I'm just being selfish. In my heart, I ruined everything I touched. Jake looked out the window. Behind the glass, dark clouds were running across the sky, and light rain was tapping on the windowsill. Life is not over, he said after a minute. You'll get better, and it's probably worth visiting a psychotherapist. Understand your problems. Lindsay shuddered. I may be transferred to a psychiatric ward. The doctor says I need time to stabilize. Jake nodded. He didn't know if he could help or if he wanted to. The memories of her betrayal and her ridicule burned painfully, but it was hard to see her in such a state. I'll leave, he said, getting up. You need to rest. Wait, she frantically extended her hand and touched his palm. I will still ask for your forgiveness. I'm not asking you to come back to me. I need help, Jake. I'm all alone. He pursed his lips, feeling in his soul a painful compassion intertwined with bitterness. I don't know how to help you, he finally squeezed out. But if you need money for treatment or anything else, tell me. I won't leave you to die. Lindsay nodded, looking down. Thank you. He carefully removed his hand, seeing a hint of regret flicker in her eyes. Happily, was all Jake said, leaving the room. Outside the door in the hallway, he leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. How did I get to this point? He thought. My wife is in a psychiatric hospital, her lover is in prison, and I'm walking around here, not knowing what to do with all this pain. Grandma Edna would probably chuckle maliciously and say that karma returned the debt. But the feeling of triumph did not come, just quiet hopelessness. Jake returned to the car. Rye was reading a newspaper at that time, but seeing the boss's gloomy face, he threw it away. Well, how is she? It's bad, Jake answered briefly, lowering himself into the seat. In poor condition, both physical and moral. Rye pressed the ignition button. So, and what do you think you should do? Jake rubbed his face with his hands. I don't know. I promised to help with money if needed, but I'm not sick. He fell silent, and his friend put his hand on his shoulder. I understand, boss. I understand that it is difficult, but you don't have to save her at the cost of your own soul. Yes, she is sick. Yes, she has psychiatric problems. But is it your fault? She chose the path herself. And yet, Jake said with a sigh, we shared life for 10 years, paradise. I was for her, a husband. Maybe you were, but she herself abandoned you, Rye said harshly. Look, boss, I don't want to sound bad, but don't take too much on yourself. She has doctors, she has. Well, if anything, the state, and you just move on with your life. Jake frowned as if he was trying to process those words. It's easy to say, move on with your life. But inside, he still had humanity. She asked for help. We'll see, he finally said. Okay, let's go. We still have work to do. Ryan nodded and drove the car out of the parking lot. Driving past the hospital buildings, Jake glanced out the window, as if hoping to see Lindsay's silhouette. But no, nothing. All that remained was vague anxiety. A week has passed. It was a bright time for the workshop. Rockland Trucks officially signed a contract with Jake, providing him with a permanent job servicing their fleet. Ryan enthusiastically plunged into the process, drew up a schedule, and arranged an additional place in the box. Cash advances made it possible to purchase new diagnostic equipment. New clients came and asked how Jake was doing now, and he looked at them no longer with despondency, but with hope. He heard about Lindsay from Doreen. They said she was transferred to the psychiatric ward at the city hospital for longer treatment. Doctors believe that she has a severe depressive episode, borderline state. Some talk about psychosis due to stress. Poor Lindsay, Jake thought, but tried to shut himself out. No, he was not indifferent. He simply did not have the strength to worry endlessly. He already went to see her again, brought a small basket of fruit, and discovered that she was being given strong drugs. She had difficulty speaking, as if she was slow. I see Carmaville in a dream, she whispered as he sat down on a chair next to her. I can't get rid of it. He just shrugged. Maybe it takes time for the memories to fade. She didn't argue, rolling her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered as he was leaving. Sorry, Jake. He left with a heavy heart. Enough, he convinced himself. I have already done everything I could. Trevor McClintock was in the pre-trial detention center at the same time, unaccustomed to cramped cells and lack of amenities. His lawyers tried to get him bail, but the judge refused, saying the risks were too great. The accusations grew like a snowball. Damn it, Trevor howled into the phone when he was cleared for calls. I will give everything. I will return it. You just. But the processes took their course. Trevor's clients, deceived by him, testified, the jury prepared, and the prosecutor's office collected evidence. Trevor was facing a real prison sentence. Nobody wanted to cover up his machinations anymore, and Lindsay, whom he considered his woman, ended up in a psychiatric hospital also out of bounds. For some moments he remembered their hot nights, how she laughed at the henpecked Jake. Now he sat alone in his cell, feeling that all his achievements were crumbling to dust. So karma, he thought with disgust. He didn't believe in these fairy tales. In mid-autumn, when the workshop was already functioning stably, a new touch burst into Jake's life. Paradise said to him one evening, Listen, boss, my sister is coming to town to see me. Junior, remember what I told you? I want to introduce you. Jake waved it off. For what? I'm not in the mood to make acquaintances. I think I have a divorce and a lot of problems. Rye smiled. Well, first of all, I'm not trying to remarry you. Just thought you'd like some company. You work all day and don't go anywhere. Maybe you should at least go have dinner with us. Jake thought about it. He really spent his evenings either in the workshop or at home, stewing in his own juice. Why not unwind? Okay, he shrugged. Agreed. So, on Friday after work, Rye and Jake went to a small restaurant near the embankment. Waiting for them, there was Rhea's sister, Katie, a short girl with a radiant smile, somewhat similar to her brother, but more fragile and neat. She had light brown hair tied in a braid and gray-green eyes. Hello, she exclaimed joyfully when Rye brought Jake to her. Are you the same boss that Rye talks about incessantly? Eh? Jake was embarrassed. I don't think it's incessantly, but yes, it's me. My name is Jake Carter. They sat down at the table, ordered a glass of beer and vegetable snacks. Rye was quite animated, joking and telling Katie the news. She laughed, and Jake felt how her laughter warmed his soul. He found himself smiling sincerely, without bitterness, for the first time in months. Rye says you have your own auto repair shop? Katie asked, taking a sip of her beer. This must be very interesting. Well, it's interesting for those who love cars, Jake responded. True, not everything was so rosy for us, but now it seems to be better. I see, she looked at his hands, slightly stained with motor oil, and grinned, a real mechanic. Jake replied teasingly. What is your profession, Miss Katie? I'm a primary school teacher, she said a little embarrassed, straightening her braid. I love children, I used to work in another state, but I moved to be closer to my brother, and maybe find a better school. That's great, Jake nodded. Children are our future. She smiled, and something inside him trembled at this simple formula of life. Such a contrast to the pain and betrayal he experienced, like a fresh ray of sunshine. The whole evening passed in light conversations. They talked about music, about childhood memories of Rye kicking a ball around the yard while Katie read books. Jake looked at this family warmth and felt his heart slowly thaw. Well, said Rye, looking at his watch, Katie, you have to get up early, don't you? Yes, tomorrow I have an interview at a private school, she confirmed, getting up from the table. It was nice meeting you, Jake. Mutually, he responded. Maybe I'll see you again. Certainly, Katie smiled, took her purse, and, waving, went to the exit. Rye winked at Jake. Well, boss, normal, right? Very sweet, Jake nodded, trying not to look embarrassed. Thank you for calling. Rye nodded contentedly, and they paid, following Katie out. The evening filled Jake's soul with a strange peace. He found himself thinking, I feel calm for the first time in a long time. About a month later, when the Rockland Trucks deal was well established and the shop was running smoothly, Jake received an envelope of divorce papers. In fact, she promised to send them when she left. Jake sat in his office in the workshop, reading page after page. The documents clearly stated the division of property. It was proposed to leave the house to him, but she allegedly did not need anything. She herself refused part of her share, given the circumstances. He consulted a lawyer who said, if your spouse voluntarily gives up their joint property, you can sign a divorce unilaterally. But I would still advise checking with her herself whether there is pressure from the family. She doesn't have much of a family, Jake sighed. Okay, I'll clarify. That same day, he dialed the hospital number and asked to be connected to Lindsay's room. He was told that she had been temporarily moved to a closed unit due to worsening symptoms. You can bring the papers for signature if necessary, the nurse recommended, but I don't know what condition she's in now. Jake, after hesitating, decided to go. Not because he really wanted a divorce, but he had to do all the I's. The closed department of the mental hospital was different from the usual therapeutic one. There were bars on the windows, doors with locks, and the corridors looked much gloomier. He came in the afternoon, waiting for a break in work. About Lindsay Carter? The young guard clarified, looking at the document. Okay, come in, only you have 15 minutes. I'll be quick, Jake nodded, feeling an unpleasant chill run through his skin. Lindsay sat on a hard cot in a small room with no pictures and no TV. She was wearing a blue long-sleeved hospital gown. In her hand is a rubber anti-stress ball, which seems to be the only toy she is allowed. Jake, she whispered when she saw him. Have you come again? He entered and sat down on the chair opposite. The distance between them was 1.5 meters, according to the instructions. The nurse stood in the doorway, supervising. They sent me divorce papers, he said quietly, showing the envelope. You wrote that you are refusing your share. Yes, she nodded, avoiding his gaze. I don't want anything, Jake. I have no right to demand anything after what I did. Sure, he clarified, involuntarily peering into her face. It became haggard, its features became sharper. It seems that the drugs and experiences were destroying her physical shell. I'm sure, she answered, squeezing the ball. I am too guilty. Take the house, the car, everything. I got it, Jake sighed. We can process it now if you sign. He handed her a pen and documents. Lindsay looked at the nurse, who nodded in permission. Lindsay slowly and carefully signed in all the right places. Here, she said, handing the papers back. I'm not your wife now, Jake. Free. Something broke inside him, although he understood that their marriage had long died. With an effort of will, he put the documents into a folder. Okay, get better. Thank you, Lindsay whispered. Maybe we'll see each other someday in another life. Jake didn't know what to say. He stood up and threw out the phrase, get well, that was stuck in his throat. He took one last look at her. Disheveled hair, sad eyes, full of remorse and madness mixed together. She was once the brightest woman he had ever met in his life. Now there is almost a shadow in front of him. He turned and left the room, feeling that he had finally said goodbye to what had happened between them. After visiting Lindsay at the clinic, Jake was depressed for several days, but Paradise, as always, pulled him out of his depression. Boss, come with us on Saturday for a ride out of town. Me, Katie, and a couple of other friends. Need to clear my head. Jake agreed. Warm company, going out into nature, the smell of autumn leaves, all this had a healing effect. Katie turned out to be a person with a kind heart. She noticed Jake's mood and gently encouraged. Why are you so gloomy? She asked as they walked along the path. Maybe you can tell me. Jake exhaled sharply. It's hard to tell. My ex is in a mental hospital, her lover is in prison, and I seem to be free, but I'm just sad in my soul. Katie smiled quietly. Freedom can be scary, but you know, we always have a chance to start again. Yes, it sounds nice, he muttered, but I'm not even sure what I want. Do you want to be happy? She asked quietly. He looked into her gray-green eyes. For a moment, I saw sincere participation and warmth in them. It was as if someone had looked into his soul. I guess I want to, he squeezed out. I've already forgotten what it's like. Then let yourself forget the past, she whispered. Life moves on, Jake. After these words, he found himself suddenly wanting to hug her, but did not dare. It's too early. Katie, as if sensing that he was embarrassed, took his hand and squeezed. This very closeness, simple human warmth, excited his heart. This is how their mutual attraction began. It was unhurried, gentle, without sudden jerks. They corresponded in the evenings, telling each other about their days. Katie got a job at a private school and rejoiced at the students' success. Jake shared events from the workshop. Sometimes they had dinner together, and Rye, pleased, laughed. Well, brother, everything is going like clockwork. Months passed. Lindsay continued treatment, and sometimes Jake received short letters from her, written in shaky handwriting. She apologized again and again and wrote that she had dreams from the past, how happy they were. She asked him only one thing: to forgive her. Jake read these letters with quiet sadness, but without the same anguish. Sometimes he answered in monosyllables, "Everything is fine, live." Over time, Lindsay stopped writing, probably accepting the situation, and Jake's life was starting to get better. He saw Katie more and more often. At first, it was a friendship full of heartfelt conversations. Then they realized that they were in love. For Jake, at first it seemed impossible after such a painful breakup with Lindsay, but feelings, like light, broke through the darkness. A year after Lindsay was admitted to a mental hospital, Jake and Katie got married. The wedding was simple, only close friends and Rye as a witness. Doreen, a neighbor, cried with emotion, repeating, "You deserve happiness, Jake." The workshop flourished. There were many orders. Katie continued to work as a teacher, and when their twin girls were born, Jake and she were happy to tears. Rye suggested the names Faith and Hope, and Katie agreed let life give them more faith and hope for the best. They bought a new house with a little more space, leaving the old one not for sale, but for rent, so that other tenants now lived in the house with the shabby sofa, and Jake and Katie raised two little girls in a happy environment. Every now and then Jake would look at their tiny faces and think, I finally found what I was missing. Many years later, when Faith and Hope were already in elementary school, Jake, as usual, was in a hurry to close the workshop by 6 in the evening in order to pick them up after school. Katie was late at the pedagogical council. Rye disappeared in his box, tinkering with the engine. Suddenly, the phone rang. The number was unknown. I'm listening, Jake responded. This is Dr. Rossi, a psychiatrist from the city hospital. An official voice was heard. You are in our contacts as an emergency contact. We're talking about Lindsay. Jake felt his heart clench. What's happened? She died this morning, said the doctor. Cardiac arrest. She has no relatives left, so we are calling you, if you want to settle funeral issues. Jake froze. It seemed that time had stopped. Lindsay is dead. Yes, he said quietly, swallowing the lump in his throat. Of course, I'll take it. He agreed with the doctor about the details. Then he sat for a long time in the silence of the workshop, looking into emptiness. Memories came flooding back. Young Lindsay in that faded wedding dress, in high heels, laughing, whispering to him, "You are my lighthouse." How they adopted Buddy, the puppy, from the shelter. How they argued when choosing a color for the walls in the living room. How she left, slamming the door. How I asked for forgiveness in the hospital. "I'm sorry, Lynn," he whispered, not knowing if she heard. "May you be better there than here." The only people present at the funeral were Jake, Rye, Katie, and a couple of Lindsay's former work colleagues from her days in marketing. Trevor was in prison. Lindsay was buried, and it rained all day. Jake looked at the shovel as it lowered the earth onto the coffin and felt a strange emptiness. "Let's go," Katie whispered, taking his arm. The twins' faith and hope twirled at their feet, looking in surprise at the sad ceremony. He nodded and walked away, leaving Lindsay in the arms of eternity. May her soul find the peace it never knew during her lifetime. In the evening, as the family sat at the kitchen table, the little girls played with dolls. Faith asked, "Dad, why did Aunt Lindsay die? Was she bad?" Jake sighed, looking at the children's naive eyes. "No, baby, she wasn't bad. She was just lost." "How do you mean you got lost?" Hope clarified. "Sometimes people make mistakes," Katie chimed in, stroking her daughter's hair. "Big mistakes that break them. But this does not mean that they are inherently bad. They just made the wrong choice someday." The girls were silent, thinking. Then they continued the game, and Jake and Katie looked at each other. Her gaze was filled with warmth and understanding. He nodded, squeezing her hand. And somewhere deep in his soul, he felt, karma had completed its circle. Everyone got what they deserved, and he, albeit with a scar on his heart, still found a new family, love, and hope. Sitting at the table, listening to the happy babble of the children, he understood. Life had given him a second chance. Dear listeners, our journey through the glass streets of Karmaville has ended a story of love, betrayal, and retribution. Jake found a new chance, Lindsay met her shadow, and Trevor paid for his greed. But think about it. Every step, every choice we make leaves a mark. How far are you willing to go before the consequences catch up with you? This story is a mirror in which our souls are reflected. Write in the comments, do you believe that you have to pay for everything, and did Lindsay have a chance to turn back? Your thoughts are the sparks that ignite new stories. Subscribe so you don't miss out as karma finds her next target. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.